They fined me $12,000 for windows they approved. 5 years later, their corrupt president was forced to sign me a $75,000 reimbursement check. When I bought my house, the windows were one of the first things I noticed, and not in a good way. They rattled whenever the wind blew, leaked cold air in the winter, and jammed shut in the summer. The wooden frames were warped, the paint chipped, and the glass fogged from years of moisture trapped inside. It felt like the house was groaning every time a storm rolled through. I told myself I'd replace them eventually, but as every homeowner knows, eventually can take years. It wasn't until last spring, after months of budgeting and cutting corners, that I finally saved enough to do it right. I researched options, compared contractors, and most importantly, made sure every single design was in compliance with the HOA's strict rules. The Architectural Review Committee, infamous for nitpicking everything from mailbox paint to flower bed borders, finally approved my submission. I had the stamped paperwork in my files, the email confirmation saved, even the committee chair's signature in black ink. It felt like a small miracle. When the new energy-efficient windows were installed, it was like my house could finally breathe. The rooms were brighter, quieter, and insulated from the outside noise. For once, I felt like the endless HOA hoops had been worth it. That's why, when a knock came at my door a week later, I wasn't worried. I opened it to see Mr. Carter, the HOA president, standing tall with his usual air of superiority. His clipboard was tucked under one arm, his polo shirt emblazoned with the HOA's logo like he was some kind of sheriff patrolling his territory. "These windows are not in compliance," he said smugly, his eyes scanning the front of my house as if he had just uncovered a crime. My stomach dropped, but I didn't panic. I reached calmly for the folder I kept by the entryway, pulling out the official approval letter. "Actually, they are. I got approval months ago. Here's the signed confirmation from the Architectural Review Committee." I held out to him, thinking the issue would be resolved in seconds. But Carter didn't even look at it. He waved away like a pesky fly. "That doesn't matter," he said, his tone flat, rehearsed, and dripping with arrogance. "As HOA president, I have the authority to overrule any committee decision. These windows are not in compliance with our community standards. You'll be fined $200 a day until this is corrected." His words hit like a sledgehammer. $200 a day? That was more than my grocery budget for a week. I felt heat rise in my chest, my grip tightening on the letter that had suddenly become worthless in his eyes. I tried to keep my voice steady. You can't just ignore a written approval. I followed the process exactly, every requirement, every step. But Mr. Carter's smug smile told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't about windows. This was about control. And he had just declared war. It didn't take long for the situation to spiral out of control. At first, I thought Mr. Carter's threats were just posturing, his usual power play to scare me into submission. But within days, the letters began arriving. The envelopes, all stamped with the HOA seal, piled up on my kitchen counter like a stack of unpaid bills. Each one carried harsher language than the last. Non-compliance penalty notice. Immediate action required. Final warning before escalation. By the end of the first month, the fines had reached several $1,000s. By the second, they had ballooned to an unthinkable $12,000. Every letter threatened consequences I couldn't ignore, liens on my property, lawsuits, even foreclosure if I didn't comply. I tried everything before it reached that point. I called Carter directly, hoping to appeal to reason. "You've seen the approval," I reminded him. "The committee signed off on these windows. This isn't fair." But fairness had nothing to do with it. On the other end of the line, his voice was cold, almost gleeful. "The approval was a mistake. You should have known better. Pay the fines or face the consequences." Then he hung up, leaving me staring at the phone in stunned silence. I turned to my neighbors, hoping for support. Instead, I got whispers. At backyard fences and in hushed tones at the mailbox, they told me stories. Carter had a reputation, an ugly one. He had gone after a family for painting their shutters the wrong shade of blue, another for planting a tree too close to the sidewalk. Anyone who didn't fit his vision for the neighborhood became a target. And once he had you in his sights, he never let go. Hiring a lawyer was my only option. But the moment I stepped into that world, I realized how uneven the fight really was. The HOA had deep pockets, our pockets funded by dues. Every motion filed, every hour billed, drained me faster than I could recover. My attorney was competent but blunt. You can win this, but it'll cost you far more than 12 grand. Sometimes, paying is the lesser evil. So that's what I did. I wrote a check for $12,000. Money I had scraped together over years of saving, gone in an instant. My hand shook as I signed it, fury boiling in my chest. It wasn't just about the money. It was the principle. It felt like theft, legalized, polished, and carried out under the banner of community standards. And the worst part? Carter knew it. He thrived on it. As I dropped the envelope in the mailbox, one thought burned in the back of my mind. He thinks this is over. He has no idea what's coming. After handing over $12,000, I told myself I would move on, that I'd swallow the loss, protect my home, and keep my head down. But every time I looked at those windows, my approved windows, I felt the anger rise again. Carter hadn't just taken my money. He had humiliated me. And deep down, I knew I wasn't his first victim. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to let it go. I started small. I began attending every single HOA meeting, sitting quietly in the back while Carter presided over the room like a king holding court. I watched the way his inner circle nodded at every word he said, while the rest of the homeowners shifted uncomfortably, too intimidated to speak up. Then I went further. Under state law, homeowners had the right to review HOA records. It was a rule Carter had likely hoped no one would ever use. But I did. I filed written requests, demanded access to financial statements, budgets, invoices, even board meeting minutes. At first, he tried to stonewall me, delaying responses, claiming the records weren't ready for release. But the law was on my side, and eventually, he had no choice but to hand them over. That's when the real digging began. Night after night, I sat at my dining table with stacks of paper spread across it, highlighter in one hand, calculator in the other. My house looked like a detective's office from a crime drama. Folders, receipts, sticky notes, arrows pointing to names and dollar amounts. And the deeper I went, the clearer the picture became. The landscaping budget was my first red flag. Year after year, the HOA paid tens of thousands of dollars to a company called Green Horizons Maintenance. At first glance, it seemed legitimate, until I discovered that Green Horizons was owned by Carter's brother-in-law. The costs were double the going rate in our county, padded with vague charges like soil treatment and premium mulch upgrade. Then there were the consulting fees. Tens of thousands flowing every quarter to a firm with a generic name, Carter and Associates, LLC. My chest tightened as I traced the address listed on the invoices. It wasn't a business park or an office downtown. It was Carter's own home address. And the worst of it? The reserve fund. That pool of money, set aside for emergencies like roof repairs or storm damage, was being siphoned off little by little. Transfers with no explanation. Withdrawals labeled administrative reallocation. I calculated over $80,000 missing in just 3 years. It hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just about my windows. Carter had been bleeding the entire neighborhood dry for years, hiding behind the HOA's rules and the silence of people too afraid to question him. For the first time since writing that $12,000 check, I felt something shift inside me. The anger was still there, but now it was sharper, focused. This wasn't just personal anymore. It was bigger. Carter thought he could bully me into submission. Instead, he had handed me the one thing he never expected, a reason to fight back. The fluorescent lights in my cramped home office flickered as I sat at my desk, surrounded by stacks of documents, bank statements, and cryptic emails I'd painstakingly gathered over the past year. Each piece of paper was a brick in the wall of evidence I'd built against Carter and the HOA board. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating for just a moment before I typed the final sentence of my formal complaint to the State HOA Oversight Commission. It was done. I hit send, and a wave of relief mixed with dread washed over me. This wasn't just a complaint. It was a declaration of war. Carter, the HOA president, had underestimated me from start. His smug grin at the last board meeting, when he dismissed my concerns about the missing funds as clerical errors, still burned in my mind. He thought I was just another disgruntled homeowner, one who'd grumble for a bit and then fall back in line. He thought I'd give up. He was wrong. For weeks after filing the complaint, I heard nothing. The silence was deafening. Every morning, I checked my email, expecting some acknowledgement from the commission, but my inbox remained stubbornly empty. Doubt crept in. Had I been too vague? Had I misjudged the evidence? Maybe Carter was right. Maybe I was just a paranoid troublemaker, tilting at windmills. My wife, Sarah, noticed the tension in my shoulders and tried to reassure me. "You did the right thing, Mark," she'd say, pouring me another cup of coffee. "Just give it time." But time felt like it was slipping away, and with it, my resolve. Then, 6 months later, everything changed. It was a Tuesday afternoon, gray and drizzly, when a black sedan pulled into the cul-de-sac. A woman in a sharp blazer stepped out, her clipboard clutched like a shield. She introduced herself as Ms. Delgado, an investigator from the state HOA Oversight Commission. Her tone was professional but clipped, her eyes scanning the neighborhood like she was cataloging every detail. "Mr. Thompson," she said, shaking my hand firmly, "we've received your complaint, and we're here to follow up." I invited her inside, my heart pounding. Over coffee, I laid out the evidence again. The inflated maintenance contracts awarded to Carter's brother-in-law, the unexplained withdrawals from the HOA's reserve fund, the forged signatures on budget approvals. Ms. Delgado listened intently, jotting notes and asking pointed questions. "And you're certain no one else on the board was complicit?" she asked, her pen pausing midair. "I can't be sure," I admitted. "But Carter's the one pulling the strings. The others just follow his lead." She nodded, her expression unreadable. "We'll need to speak with the board and review the financials. Expect subpoenas in the next few weeks." Subpoenas. The word hit like a thunderclap. This was real now, no turning back. As Ms. Delgado drove away, I felt a strange mix of triumph and unease. I'd set something in motion, something bigger than me, and there was no telling how it would end. The subpoenas arrived swiftly, like arrows finding their mark. Carter's name was on the first one, followed by the treasurer, Mrs. Jenkins, and the rest of the board. The neighborhood buzzed with gossip. Mrs. Callahan, the nosy retiree next door, cornered me at the mailbox. "Mark, what's all this about investigators and subpoenas? Are we in trouble?" Her voice was a mix of curiosity and accusation. "Not us," I said, forcing a smile. "Just making sure the HOA's doing right by us." She raised an eyebrow but didn't press further. I could tell she didn't trust me, not entirely. That was fine. Trust wasn't the goal, justice was. The auditors came next, a team of 3 in ill-fitting suits who descended on the HOA office like vultures. They hauled out boxes of records, laptops, and even Carter's precious leather-bound ledger, which he always carried to meetings like a badge of authority. I watched from my porch as they loaded their van, catching a glimpse of Carter through the office window. His face was pale, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous tick in his jaw. The HOA board meetings, once dull affairs filled with petty debates over landscaping and parking rules, turned into battlegrounds. The air was thick with tension, every agenda item laced with unspoken accusations. Carter presided over the meetings with a forced smile, but his eyes darted nervously, avoiding mine. I sat in the back row, my arms crossed, a quiet smile playing on my lips. I didn't need to say a word. The evidence was doing the talking now. One evening, as the board argued over a proposed increase in dues, Mrs. Jenkins broke the silence. "This is ridiculous," she snapped, her voice trembling. "We're under investigation, and you're all acting like nothing's wrong." She glared at Carter, who shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The room fell silent. For the first time, I saw cracks in the board's loyalty to him. After the meeting, Carter cornered me in the parking lot. His face was flushed, his voice low and sharp. "You think you're clever, Thompson? Stirring up trouble like this? You're tearing this community apart." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I'm not the one who's been dipping into the reserve fund, Carter. That's on you." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. Instead, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. I stood there, my heart racing, but a strange calm settled over me. I knew what was coming. The truth was closing in, and Carter couldn't outrun it forever. The day of the audit report felt like Judgment Day. For months, I had been the lone voice raising questions, accused of being disruptive and obsessed. But when the state investigators finally released their findings, the truth landed like a hammer. Page after page outlined Carter's empire of corruption. Inflated landscaping contracts, self-dealing through shell companies, and personal expenses disguised as consulting fees. The report detailed how reserve funds had been drained to cover vacations, luxury purchases, and even a private gym membership. It was worse than I imagined. The homeowners' meeting called to discuss the audit was packed to the brim. Neighbors who usually avoided conflict showed up in droves, clutching copies of the report with red underlines and sticky notes marking damning passages. Carter walked in with his usual arrogance, but for the first time, he didn't look untouchable. Whispers followed him like a shadow. When the state auditor stood before the room and announced the findings, the tension broke. Gasps, shouts, even laughter filled the hall. Carter sat rigid, his face flushing red as each accusation was read aloud. Fraud, self-dealing, misappropriation of funds. Then came the verdict. He was to be removed immediately as HOA president. He would face heavy personal fines, tens of thousands of dollars, and was barred from ever holding office in any association within the state. The man who once lorded over every detail of our neighborhood now sat powerless, exposed, and humiliated. But the punishment didn't end with him. The HOA itself was ordered to repay every homeowner who had been unfairly fined or penalized under Carter's reign. Years of bullying and intimidation were finally acknowledged as illegitimate. Families who had been squeezed dry by arbitrary rules would get restitution. For me, it was vindication. My $12,000 fine, the one I'd thought I'd never see again, was included in that reimbursement order. But more than the money, it was the look on Carter's face that I'll never forget. A mixture of disbelief, rage, and fear as his carefully built house of cards came crashing down around him. The fall was swift, public, and absolute. For the first time in years, our neighborhood felt like it could finally breathe again. And Carter, once the self-appointed king of our community, was nothing more than a cautionary tale. The mailbox creaked as I opened it, the rusty hinge protesting like it knew the weight of what was inside. It had been 5 years since Carter, that smug HOA president, had slapped me with a $12,000 fine over a fabricated violation, a non-compliant fence height that he claimed was an inch too tall. 5 years since I'd stared at that fine, my blood boiling, vowing to fight back. 5 years of gathering evidence, filing complaints, and enduring tense HOA meetings. Now, on a crisp October morning, I pulled out a plain white envelope with the HOA's logo stamped in the corner. My heart skipped a beat. I tore it open, my fingers trembling with anticipation. Inside was a check, crisp and official, made out to me, Mark Thompson. The amount? $75,000. I blinked, rereading the numbers to make sure I wasn't dreaming. There it was, my original $12,000 fine, plus damages, interest, and penalties. The state HOA Oversight Commission had come through, their investigation tearing apart Carter's web of lies. The auditors had found it all: the inflated contracts, the siphoned funds, the forged signatures. And now, this check was proof of their verdict. But the best part? I held the check up to the light, and there, in shaky, uneven ink, was Carter's signature. The same man who'd smirked at me during board meetings, who'd cornered me in the parking lot, and called me a troublemaker, had been forced to sign his own defeat. That wobbly scrawl screamed humiliation, and I couldn't help but grin. I walked back to the house, the check clutched tightly in my hand. Sarah was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. "You're smiling like you just won the lottery," she said, glancing up with a teasing smirk. "Better than that," I replied, sliding the check across the counter. Her eyes widened as she read the amount, her knife pausing mid-chop. "Is this—" she started, her voice trailing off. "Yep," I said. leaning against the counter. Carter's done for. This is everything we fought for, and then some. She let out a laugh, a mix of relief and disbelief. You did it, Mark. You actually did it. I nodded, but my mind drifted back to the long road that led to this moment. After filing the complaint with the commission, I'd endured months of silence. Then the whirlwind of investigators, subpoenas, and auditors. The HOA board meetings had turned into battlegrounds, with Carter's once loyal allies like Mrs. Jenkins starting to crack under the pressure. The neighborhood had buzzed with rumors. Mrs. Callahan, the nosy retiree, had even stopped me at the mailbox to whisper. I knew Carter was up to no good. I just smiled and nodded, keeping my cards close. The commission's final report, delivered last month, had been damning. Carter was forced to resign as HOA president, and the board was ordered to repay every homeowner who'd been wrongfully fined, with interest and penalties. Some whispered that criminal charges might follow, but for now, this check was my victory. That evening, I sat on the porch, sipping a beer and staring at the check one last time before tucking it into my wallet. The neighborhood was quiet, the cul-de-sac bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. I thought about Carter, probably holed up in his overpriced McMansion, licking his wounds. Part of me wanted to march over there and wave the check in his face, but I didn't need to. The shaky signature said it all. He knew he'd lost. Sarah joined me on the porch, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "What's next?" she asked, her voice soft but curious. I shrugged, taking a sip of my beer. "Maybe I'll run for HOA president," I said, half joking. She laughed, nudging my shoulder. "God help us all," she teased. As the stars began to speckle the sky, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The fight was over, and I'd won. But more than the money, it was the principle, the knowledge. The bank's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as I stood at the teller's counter, sliding the $75,000 check across the polished surface. The teller, a young woman with a polite smile, raised an eyebrow at the amount but processed it without comment. I couldn't help but laugh, a low, triumphant chuckle that echoed in the quiet lobby. 5 years ago, Carter, the HOA president with his smug grin and iron grip on the neighborhood, had threatened to take my house over a fabricated $12,000 fine for a fence he claimed was an inch too tall. Now here I was depositing a check signed by his trembling hand, reimbursing me 6 times over with damages, interest, and penalties. Justice had come full circle, and this time it was mine. As the teller handed me the deposit receipt, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass partition. The lines on my face told the story of the past 5 years, the sleepless nights poring over HOA records, the tense board meetings where Carter avoided my gaze, the endless waiting for the state HOA Oversight Commission to act. It had all led to this moment. I tucked the receipt into my wallet and stepped outside into the crisp autumn air, feeling lighter than I had in years. Back home, I found Sarah in the living room, flipping through a magazine. She looked up, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "Well, did it go through?" I grinned, holding up the receipt. Every penny. Carter's officially paid up. She tossed the magazine aside and clapped her hands. I wish I could have seen his face when he signed that check. "Oh, you don't need to," I said, sinking into the couch beside her. That shaky signature said it all. He's humiliated, and he knows it. The memory of Carter's downfall played like a movie in my mind. After I filed the complaint with the commission, the investigators had descended, followed by subpoenas and auditors who tore through the HOA's financials like hawks. The board meetings had turned into battlegrounds, with Carter's once loyal allies like Mrs. Jenkins starting to question him. The commission's final report had been a death knell. Carter was forced to resign. The HOA was ordered to repay every wrongful fine, and whispers of potential criminal charges hung over him like a storm cloud. The $75,000 check was the cherry on top, a public admission of his guilt, scrawled in his own hand. That evening, the neighborhood felt different. I took a walk down the cul-de-sac, passing the manicured lawns and cookie-cutter houses that had once felt like Carter's kingdom. Mrs. Callahan, the nosy retiree who'd grilled me about the investigation months ago, waved from her porch. "Heard you got your money, Mark," she called, a sly grin on her face. "About time someone put Carter in his place." I nodded, smiling back. Just doing my part, Mrs. Callahan. As I passed Carter's house, I noticed the curtains were drawn, the driveway empty. Rumor had it he was planning to sell and move away, unable to face the neighbors he'd once lorded over. I didn't feel sorry for him. He'd built his empire on intimidation and lies, and now it had crumbled. The thought of him sitting alone, pen in hand, forced to sign my reimbursement check, was sweeter than any apology he could have offered. Back home, Sarah and I sat down to dinner, a rare, relaxed meal without the shadow of the HOA looming over us. "What are we going to do with the money?" she asked, twirling a forkful of pasta. I leaned back, considering. Pay off some bills, maybe take a trip. But honestly, the money's not the point. It's knowing we beat him. She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You didn't just beat him, Mark. You showed everyone what happens when you stand up to a bully." As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, I felt a profound sense of closure. The fight had been long, but it was worth it. The news of Carter's downfall spread through the cul-de-sacs and manicured lawns of Willow Creek like wildfire through dry grass. By the time the sun rose the morning after I deposited the $75,000 check, whispers had already begun to ripple across the neighborhood. It started with a text from Mrs. Callahan, the nosy retiree who'd grilled me about the investigation months ago. "Heard you took down Carter. Good for you, Mark." By noon, my phone buzzed with messages from neighbors I barely knew. People who'd kept their heads down during Carter's reign, too afraid to challenge his petty tyranny. Now, they were awake, and the air felt electric with possibility. For years, Carter had ruled the Willow Creek Homeowners Association like a petty dictator. His fines were legendary. $500 for a lawn ornament shaped like a flamingo, $1,000 for a mailbox painted the wrong shade of blue, $2,500 for Christmas lights left up past January 15th. He'd wielded the HOA bylaws like a club, issuing threats and penalties with a smirk that dared anyone to fight back. Most didn't. Neighbors grumbled in private, paid their fines, and repainted their mailboxes, their spirits chipped away with each compliance. I've been one of them once, swallowing my anger when he slapped me with that $12,000 fine for a fence he claimed was an inch too tall. But I hadn't stayed silent, and now neither would they. The community center was packed for the next HOA gathering, a stark contrast to the half-empty meetings of Carter's era. The room hummed with nervous energy as neighbors filed in, their usual hushed deference replaced by animated chatter. Folding chairs scraped against the linoleum floor, and the smell of burnt coffee from a cheap machine filled the air. I sat near the back, my arms crossed, watching the crowd. Sarah squeezed my hand under the table, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Look at this turnout," she whispered. "You did this, Mark." I shook my head, uncomfortable with the praise. "I just started it. They're here because they're done being scared." The meeting hadn't even started when people began approaching me. First was Mr. Patel, a quiet widower who lived 3 houses down. His hands trembled as he gripped my arm, his voice thick with emotion. "You gave us the courage to fight back," he said, his eyes glistening. "Carter fined me $3,000 for planting roses without approval. I paid because I didn't know what else to do. But now," he trailed off, straightening his shoulders, "now I'm going to file my own complaint." Before I could respond, Mrs. Jenkins, the former HOA treasurer who'd cracked under the pressure of the investigation, shuffled over. Her face was pale, her usual prim demeanor frayed. "Mark, I owe you an apology," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew Carter was up to something, but I looked the other way. I was afraid. You showed me I should have spoken up." I nodded, unsure what to say. Mrs. Jenkins had been complicit in Carter's schemes, rubber-stamping his budgets and ignoring the missing funds. But her regret seemed genuine, and I wasn't here to hold grudges. "It's not too late to make it right," I said. She gave a small, grateful nod and returned to her seat. One by one, others approached. A young couple, the Garcias, who'd moved in last year, told me about a $4,000 fine for painting their driveway a shade of gray Carter deemed too modern. "We're going to the commission," Mrs. Garcia said, her voice fierce. "If you can get your money back, so can we." A single mom, Lee Sing-Nguyen, shared how Carter had harassed her about her son's basketball hoop, threatening a $1,500 fine unless she removed it. "I took it down," she said, her jaw tight, "but I'm putting it back up tomorrow." The stories poured out, each one a thread in the tapestry of Carter's reign of terror. There was Mr. Kowalski, fined for a non-compliant birdhouse. The Wilsons, who'd been bullied into removing their Halloween decorations a day early, and old Mrs. Delaney, who'd paid $2,000 to avoid a lien on her home over a cracked patio tile. Each neighbor's voice grew stronger as they spoke, as if shedding years of fear. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt united, not divided. When the meeting finally began, the new interim HOA president, a soft-spoken accountant named Tom Rivera, took the podium. He was a far cry from Carter's polished arrogance. No leather-bound ledger or condescending smirk. "We're here to rebuild," Tom said, his voice steady but firm. "The commission's report exposed serious misconduct, and we're committed to transparency moving forward. If you've been wrongfully fined, we'll help you file claims for reimbursement." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd. Someone clapped, and soon the room erupted in applause. I stayed quiet, but Sarah nudged me, grinning. "You're not getting out of this one, hero." Tom continued, outlining plans for a new election, revised bylaws, and an audit of all past fines. But the real turning point came when Mrs. Callahan stood up, her voice cutting through the chatter. "I've lived here for 20 years, she said, her hands planted on her hips. "Carter made us feel like prisoners in our own homes. I say we don't just stop at reimbursements. Let's make sure no one like him ever runs this HOA again." The room roared with agreement. People were on their feet, shouting ideas. Term limits for board members, open financial records, a community review process for fines. I watched, a lump forming in my throat. This wasn't just about Carter anymore. It was about a neighborhood reclaiming its voice. After the meeting, a group of us lingered in the parking lot, the autumn air crisp against our skin. The stars were bright overhead, and the usual tension that hung over Willow Creek was gone. Lisa and Gwen approached me, her son trailing behind her with a basketball tucked under his arm. "Thanks, Mark," she said. "You didn't just fight for yourself. You fought for all of us." I shrugged, embarrassed. "I just wanted my $12,000 back." She laughed, shaking her head. "Sure, but you broke Carter's iron grip. We're breathing freely again because of you." As Sarah and I walked home, our footsteps crunching on the fallen leaves, I thought about the past 5 years. The sleepless nights poring over HOA records, the tense confrontations with Carter, the waiting for the commission's ruling. It had all led to this. The $75,000 check, with Carter's shaky signature, was my personal victory, but this moment, this neighborhood awakening, was something bigger. It was a community reborn. The next morning, I woke to an email from the commission. They'd opened a second investigation into Carter's dealings, prompted by new complaints from my neighbors. Mr. Patel had filed for his $3,000 Rose fine, the Garcias for their $4,000 driveway penalty, and others were following suit. Carter's McMansion was up for sale, the for sale sign a silent admission of defeat. Rumor had it he'd moved to a condo downtown, unable to face the neighbors he'd once bullied. Sarah and I sat on our porch that evening, sipping coffee and watching the neighborhood come alive. Kids played basketball in Lisa's driveway, their laughter echoing down the street. Mrs. Callahan was stringing up Halloween lights, a week early, just because she could. For the first time in years, Willow Creek felt like home again. Not Carter's kingdom, but ours. "What's next for the hero of Willow Creek?" Sarah teased, nudging my shoulder. I smiled, looking out at the glowing streetlights. "Maybe I'll plant a flamingo in the yard," I said. "See if anyone dares to find me," she laughed, and we sat in comfortable silence, basking in the freedom of a neighborhood finally awake. The emergency elections for the Willow Creek HOA board were called just a week after the community gathering that had ignited the neighborhood's awakening. Word spread like a spark in dry tinder. This wasn't going to be another rubber stamp affair where Carter and his cronies slid back into power with minimal opposition. No, this time, the vote was a revolution. Neighbors who had once treated HOA meetings like root canals, avoiding them at all costs, showed up in droves, their faces set with determination. They were done being passive victims of petty tyranny. They wanted their power back, and they weren't going to let it slip away again. The community center, which had felt stuffy and oppressive under Carter's regime, buzzed with a new energy on election night. Folding chairs were set up in rows that stretched to the back wall, and everyone was filled. Latecomers stood along the sides, clutching styrofoam cups of coffee and murmuring in clusters. The air smelled of fresh brewed caffeine and something else. Hope, perhaps, mingled with the faint scent of rain from the light drizzle outside. Sarah and I arrived early, weaving through the crowd to claim seats near the front. "This is incredible," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide as she scanned the room. "Look at everyone. It's like the whole neighborhood showed up." I nodded, a knot of unease twisting in my stomach. "Yeah, but now comes the hard part, making sure we don't just trade one bully for another." Before the meeting kicked off, the interim president, Tom Rivera, took the stage, a simple podium this time, no gavel or leather ledger in sight. He cleared his throat, and the room fell into a respectful hush. "Folks, we've all seen what happens when power goes unchecked," he began, his voice steady and sincere. "Carter's gone, but the scars remain. Tonight, we elect a new board. 5 members who will serve with transparency, fairness, and accountability. Nominations are open." The nominations started slowly, like a dam breaking. Mr. Patel, the widower who'd shared his story of the $3,000 rose fine, raised his hand first. "I nominate Lisa Nguyen," he said, his voice gaining strength. "She's a single mom, works 2 jobs, and she stood up to Carter about that basketball hoop. She knows what it's like to fight for her family." Applause rippled through the crowd, and Lisa, caught off guard, blushed but stood to accept the nomination with a firm nod. Next came Mrs. Callahan, her voice booming as always. "Tom Rivera for president. He's already proven he's not in it for the glory." More cheers, and Tom accepted with a humble smile. The Garcias nominated themselves as a team for the treasurer and secretary roles. "We've got 2 heads for the price of 1, and we're tired of seeing our hard-earned money mismanaged," Mrs. Garcia declared, earning laughs and nods. Then, unexpectedly, a sea of hands pointed toward me. "Mark Thompson," someone shouted from the back. It was Mr. Kowalski, the birdhouse fine victim, his face flushed with enthusiasm. "You started this whole thing, Mark. You took on Carter and won. We need you on the board." The room erupted in agreement, chants of "Mark, Mark," echoing off the walls. Sarah squeezed my hand, her eyes sparkling with pride, but I felt a wave of panic. I stood up slowly, waving my hands to quiet the crowd. "Well, hold on, everyone. I appreciate that. Really, I do. But I'm going to decline." Murmurs of surprise swept through the room, and I pressed on before doubt could set in. I didn't do this to take control. I did it so we could all be free from corruption. I fought for my $12,000 and, in the process, for all of us. But leading? That's not my fight anymore. I want to be a neighbor, not a ruler. Let's elect people who want this job because they care about the community, not because they crave the power. There was a moment of stunned silence, then applause, thunderous and genuine. Tom clapped me on the shoulder as I sat down. "You're a good man, Mark. And you're right. This board needs fresh blood, not heroes." The nominations continued, building a diverse slate that reflected Willow Creek's true makeup. We ended up with Lisa Nguyen for vice president, a young software engineer named Raj Singh for maintenance oversight. He'd been fined $800 for a non-standard solar panel installation and promised eco-friendly reforms. The Wilsons, the couple who'd battled over Halloween decorations, took on the role of community liaison, vowing to end the harassment over holiday cheer. And rounding out the group was old Mrs. Delaney, the patio tile survivor, elected as at-large member for her no-nonsense wisdom and decades of neighborhood history. The voting was straightforward but electric. Paper ballots collected in a transparent box, tallied on the spot by volunteers under the watchful eyes of the crowd. No backroom deals, no whispers of favoritism. When the results were announced, the new board swept in with overwhelming majorities. Lisa got 85% of the vote, Tom 92%. Cheers filled the room as each member took their oath, promising to uphold the bylaws with integrity. For the first time in years, it felt like a true democracy, not a farce. But the real magic happened after the elections, during the first official meeting of the new board. With the community still packed into the center, they dove straight into the first order of business, refunding every homeowner wrongfully fined under Carter's regime. Tom laid out the plan, projecting a simple spreadsheet on a borrowed screen. We've audited the records, thanks to the commission's help, and identified over $150,000 in improper fines over the last 5 years. Starting tomorrow, we'll process reimbursements with interest. If you think you qualify, submit your claim to the new HOA email by Friday. The room buzzed with excitement. Mr. Patel wiped a tear from his eye. My roses can bloom in peace now. The Garcias high-fived, already calculating their driveway refund. Even Mrs. Jenkins, who'd stayed in the shadows since her apology, approached the board with a quiet request for her own restitution. She'd been fined $1,200 for unauthorized window treatments. Not stopping there, the board unveiled their second priority, creating strict oversight policies to ensure no one like Carter could ever rise again. Lisa took the lead, outlining the reforms with the passion of someone who'd lived the nightmare. First, all financial decisions will require a public vote for anything over $500, she said, ticking off points on her fingers. Second, board meetings will be live-streamed and archived online. No more closed doors. Third, an independent auditor will review our books quarterly, and we'll establish a homeowner review committee to vet any fines before they're issued. Raj chimed in with tech-savvy ideas. We'll build an app for transparent voting and fine appeals. No more paper trails that can be lost like under Carter. The Wilsons added community-focused touches, like mandatory ethics training for board members and a whistleblower hotline for anonymous tips. Mrs. Delaney, ever the voice of experience, proposed term limits. 2 years max, no re-election without a cooling-off period. Power corrupts, and absolute power. Well, we all know how that ends. As the proposals unfolded, I sat back with Sarah, watching the neighborhood transform before my eyes. This wasn't just a board. It was a safeguard, a collective shield against the Carters of the world. The meeting stretched late into the night, fueled by coffee and camaraderie, with neighbors brainstorming additions, suggestions for community gardens funded by the reclaimed fines, block parties without permit hassles, even a neighborhood watch that focused on support rather than surveillance. By the time we adjourned, the rain had stopped, and a full moon lit the parking lot as people filed out. Sarah and I walked home arm in arm, the cool night air a balm after the heated discussions. "You really turned this down?" she asked, glancing at me with a mix of awe and amusement. I chuckled. "Yeah, being on the board sounds like a headache. I'd rather grill burgers at the next block party and watch everyone else fix the place up." She laughed, leaning her head on my shoulder. "Fair enough, but don't think you're off the hook entirely. Mrs. Callahan already asked if you'd help with the garden committee." The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of change. Refunds started rolling out. My neighbors' mailboxes filled not with fines, but with checks. Mr. Patel planted a whole new rose bush in celebration. The Garcias repainted their driveway a bolder gray just to test the new rules, and Lisa's son shot hoops without a single glare from an HOA enforcer. The oversight policies were codified into the bylaws, voted on by the full community in a record turnout. Carter's old office, once a fortress of secrecy, became an open hub with glass walls and a suggestion box that overflowed daily. One evening, as Sarah and I sat on the porch watching kids bike down the street, free from speed limit citations, I felt a deep contentment settle in. Willow Creek wasn't perfect, but it was ours now. The revolution I'd sparked had evolved into something sustainable, a neighborhood where power served the people, not the other way around. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in victory hues, I knew we'd won more than just a board election. We'd won back our home. Months had passed since the emergency elections that reshaped the Willow Creek HOA, and the neighborhood was unrecognizable in the best way possible. I stood by the new bay windows in my living room, sunlight streaming through the glass, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floor. The windows were a recent upgrade, paid for with a chunk of the $75,000 check that had arrived in my mailbox, a check signed by Carter's trembling hand, reimbursing my wrongful $12,000 fine with damages, interest, and penalties. As I gazed out at the cul-de-sac, where kids rode bikes and neighbors waved without fear of fines, I reflected on the journey that brought us here. 5 years ago, I'd felt powerless, bullied into paying for a fence violation I never committed. Today, I had money in the bank, neighbors who respected me, and a community that had finally healed. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It started with that first spark of defiance when I filed my complaint with the state HOA Oversight Commission, as I detailed in my office all those years ago, surrounded by stacks of evidence. The investigators, subpoenas, and auditors had followed, dismantling Carter's web of corruption. His reign, built on petty fines for lawn ornaments, mailbox colors, and holiday decorations, had crumbled under the weight of truth. The $75,000 check was my personal victory, but the real triumph was what came after. A neighborhood awakened, a new board elected, and a system reformed to prevent another Carter from ever rising again. I sipped my coffee, watching Mr. Patel tend to his rose bushes across the street. He'd received his $3,000 refund for his unapproved roses and planted a whole new garden, vibrant with reds and pinks that seemed to defy Carter's gray legacy. Next door, the Garcia's driveway gleamed in its bold, unapologetic gray, their $4,000 fine returned with interest. Lisa Ingrenesson. Ethan shot baskets in their driveway. The basketball hoop reinstated without a whisper of complaint from a new HOA. The neighborhood wasn't just healing, it was thriving. That evening, I leashed up our golden retriever, Max, for a walk. The air was cool, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and chimney smoke. As we strolled down the familiar streets, I passed Carter's old house. The "For Sale" sign leaned crookedly in the unkept yard, its paint chipped and grass overgrown. The blinds were drawn, the windows dark, as if the house itself was ashamed of its former owner. Carter had moved out weeks ago. Rumor had it to a cramped condo downtown, unable to face the neighbors he'd once lorded over. His power was gone, his reputation shattered. I paused, letting Max sniff the mailbox, and felt a quiet satisfaction. Justice wasn't just the check in my bank account. It was knowing that the community he'd tried to control had risen stronger without him. Hard to believe this place used to feel like a prison, Sarah said, catching up to me. She'd joined us for the walk, her scarf bundled against the evening chill. Remember when we were afraid to put up Christmas lights? I chuckled, looping Max's leash around my hand. Yeah. Carter would have slapped us with a $500 fine for excessive wattage. Now look at Mrs. Callahan's house. I nodded toward her yard, where Halloween lights twinkled defiantly a week early, a middle finger to Carter's old rules. Sarah laughed, her breath visible in the crisp air. You did this, Mark. You gave everyone their freedom back. I shook my head, uncomfortable with the hero label. I just wanted my money back. The rest, that was all of us. She raised an eyebrow, unconvinced, but let it go. We walked in comfortable silence, passing houses that now felt like homes again. The Wilsons were setting up a pumpkin display, their kids giggling as they carved jack-o'-lanterns. Mrs. Delaney waved. From her porch, her patio tiles untouched by HOA threats. Even Mrs. Jenkins, the former treasurer who'd apologized for her complicity, was out watering her lawn, a small smile on her face. The neighborhood was alive, its pulse strong and steady. When we reached the community center, I noticed a new bulletin board by the entrance, covered in flyers for upcoming events. A fall festival, a community garden project funded by reclaimed fines, a basketball tournament organized by Leasing Win. The suggestion box, once a dusty relic, overflowed with notes, ideas for playground upgrades, book clubs, even a neighborhood podcast. The new board, led by Tom Rivera and including Lisa, Raj Singh, the Wilsons, and Mrs. Delaney, had wasted no time. They processed over $150,000 in refunds, implemented transparent voting via Raj's app, and enforced strict oversight policies to keep the HOA accountable. Meetings were now live-streamed, and the homeowner review committee vetted every fine, ensuring fairness. Willow Creek wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a community again. As we looped back toward home, we ran into Mr. Kowalski, the birdhouse fine survivor, walking his terrier. "Mark, Sarah, good to see you," he called, his face lit with a grin. "Heard the latest? The commission's looking into criminal charges against Carter. Embezzlement, maybe even fraud." I raised an eyebrow, surprised but not shocked. "Really?" Guessed that shaky signature on my check was just the start. Mr. Kowalski laughed, his dog yipping at Max. "You started a revolution, my friend. We're all breathing easier because of you." I shrugged, scratching Max behind the ears. "Just glad we can all plant birdhouses now without a fine." He chuckled and waved us off, his terrier tugging him down the street. Sarah nudged me. "You're never going to accept the credit, are you?" "Nope," I said, grinning. "But I'll take a beer in a sunset." Back home, we settled on the porch with a couple of cold ones, watching the sky turn shades of orange and purple. The neighborhood hummed with life, kids' laughter, the clink of basketballs, the soft chatter of neighbors catching up. I thought back to 5 years ago, when Carter's $12,000 fine had landed in my mailbox like a punch to the gut. I'd felt helpless, cornered by a bully who thought he was untouchable. The night spent poring over HOA records, the tense board meetings, the waiting for the commission's ruling. It had been a long, grueling fight, but every moment was worth it. The check had been my first victory, its $75,000 a testament to justice served. But this vibrant, united neighborhood was the real prize. Carter's iron grip was broken, his McMansion abandoned, his name a cautionary tale whispered at block parties. The community he tried to control had not only survived, but grown stronger, rooted in fairness and trust. Sarah clinked her bottle against mine. "To full circles," she said, her eyes sparkling. "To full circles," I echoed, taking a sip. "And to never paying another bogus fine." She laughed, and we sat in contented silence, the cool night air wrapping around us like a promise. The fight had been long, but it was worth it. This wasn't just my victory, it was everyone's. The next morning, I woke to an email from Tom Rivera updating the neighborhood on the latest board actions. The community garden was breaking ground next week, funded entirely by Carter's misappropriated fines. Lisa was organizing a mentorship program for kids like Ethan, using the basketball court as a hub. Raj's app had just rolled out a feature for real-time budget tracking, and Mrs. Delaney was leading a committee to preserve Willow Creek's history, starting with a mural celebrating our revolution. The email ended with an invitation to the fall festival, complete with a note: "Bring your best lawn ornament. No fines allowed." I smiled, forwarding the email to Sarah. She joined me in the kitchen, reading it over my shoulder. "A mural, huh? Think they'll paint you as the hero?" "Not a chance," I said, pouring her coffee. "But I might bring that flamingo ornament I've been hiding in the garage." She burst out laughing, and for the first time in years, I felt truly at home. Willow Creek had come full circle, from fear to freedom, from division to unity. As I stepped outside, the sunlight caught my new windows, reflecting a neighborhood that shone brighter than ever. Carter was gone, but we were here, stronger, together, and free.